Some of us have God on our side, and we're totally okay with everything that's taking place.
This side of Christianity is one big grift. Now stay with me because I'm going to build a bridge from Christian patriarchy to prosperity gospel on to holy suffering. And I want to start by telling a story. So this is in the early 80s, and I was vacuuming our tiny 2-bedroom trailer when the phone rang, and it was my grandmother. And she was asking for my brother's address at his college apartment. So I gave her the address and then asked her why she needed it. She had been watching Oral Roberts, who was asking for a seed blessing donation to provide college students with much needed financial support for their college education. She said it was because it occurred to her that if she was going to send $20 to Oral Roberts for a college student in need, then she might as well just send it to someone she knows who needs it. And then both she and her grandson would be blessed. And I was happy to hear that she didn't want to give money to Oral Roberts. I knew she gave him some each month. But to be honest, Oral Roberts gave me the creeps. But I was very young and naive at the time and didn't really understand what about him gave me the creeps. But I also didn't understand the significance of my grandmother refusing to send him money for this seed blessing, as he called it. But what it was really reflecting was a power of discernment that she didn't normally show. She very much was a compliant Southern Baptist, but here for this one moment, she resisted because she was sending money that she simply could not afford to give. Grifters like Oral Roberts simply do not care, and that's the foundation of this story. See, my grandmother was a very hard worker, but it was never enough, and she relied on her children in her later years, the grandchildren, to financially support her, but it never stopped her. She gave food that we purchased for her to others. She gave money that we provided to her to keep her lights on. She would give them to people like Oral Roberts. And that is the power of prosperity gospel. And for those of you who don't know, prosperity gospel is the belief that faith, obedience, and financial giving to God or religious ministries will result in material wealth, physical health, and personal blessings from God. Now, it has to be to a ministry. Just donating to any nonprofit, that's not good enough. One common tool of prosperity gospel ministers is this thing called the seed blessing or the seed faith offering. And these are offerings that are given in faith, believing that God will multiply it and bless the giver with a financial or spiritual harvest, such as a miraculous healing or a new job or some kind of financial breakthrough. And although Oral Roberts perfected that model, there have been many who have followed in his footsteps. If you don't remember Kenneth Copeland, who said he needed the private plane to avoid demons on commercial aircraft, there's Creflo Dollar, T.D. Jakes, Benny Hill, Joel Osteen, and Joyce Meyer, to name a few. One of my childhood favorites was Jimmy Swaggart because I love the way he sings. He definitely deserves to be on this list because he tried to reject the title of prosperity gospel because people don't want to be labeled that. But some of you may remember that good old Jimmy got caught on camera with a prostitute in New Orleans in 1988. And he made headlines for that, but also rejecting the Assembly of God's instructions to go to rehab and not preach for 2 years. He just started his own ministry and did it until his death in 2025, which his son now leads. When you combine people like Swaggart and Oral Roberts and everybody else who follows this model, the main point is that they profit off of Christians' gullibility. Even if you look at Brian Houston, who is the founder of Hillsong Church, which arguably is the model for the megachurch in much of American evangelical apostolic Pentecostal Christianity, he doesn't want to be known by that label. But him trying to reject it is just part of the rebranding that you see within this model of church structure. Most of them change their name to something faddish because they want to feel more modern and liberal. But the truth is, the only thing that is modern about this church model is the middle-aged pastor in too tight jeans and a rock band on stage. I will guarantee you that toxic theology and strict Christian patriarchal control are lurking out of sight backstage. And if I sound like a broken record, you know how many times I have said Christian patriarchy equals toxic theology. But what we're doing today is laying the framework from that to prosperity gospel and holy suffering. And we're going to talk about holy suffering in a minute. Now, back to my grandmother. I can't recall if she actually sent the $20 to my brother. I'll need to ask him. But obviously, this moment of discernment that she had about sending the money to Oral Roberts did not stop her from financially supporting him and his Grift machine. She was indeed a devout Southern Baptist from birth to grave, and she was obedient to Christian patriarchy to her detriment. And although my journey has taken me far away from my Southern Baptist heritage, her seeking connection through spirituality instilled in me a desire to do the same, and that's why I dedicated my book, Deconstructing, to her. That's why I still seek now, that even though I'm no longer a Southern Baptist, I'm no longer church, and I'm no longer a Christian, I still seek. So what's the bridge from Oral Roberts to Jesse Duplantis to Donald Trump? Because there is one. I've touched on the grift of money pouring into churches that in turn are not required to disclose financial information to the IRS. This is the way that many churches effectively hide millions of dollars that are coming in that do not go for their intended purposes. Many of these churches, especially those preaching the prosperity gospel, have no reporting mechanisms to disclose how church leaders spend incoming donations such as tithes or these seed blessings as they call them. Church members are indoctrinated to believe that trusting the leaders that they'll do what's right with the funds they receive because they are ordained by God to do so. It's all trust me bro theology. And then you have prosperity gospel preachers like Jesse Duplantis, who brazenly brags about his wealth, insisting that his 40,000 square foot mansion and private jet are due to God's favor for his ministry. He loves to talk about how rich he is. But preachers like Duplantis are so confident in their followers' indoctrination that Duplantis' increased wealth is also a sign of their own personal favor in their God's eyes. That even if those followers struggle to pay their own bills or put food on the table, they think they are still blessed by God by ensuring that Duplantis stays as rich as he does. Now, in one clip, Duplantis can be seen standing behind the pulpit and saying that he stepped outside of his mansion one day and someone drove by, recognized him, and tossed $5,000 in cash over the fence towards him. I don't know if that story is true or not. I think it probably is. But what Duplantis is teaching his congregation is that they are assured of being leveled up in heaven because he is so heavily favored here on earth, that strangers just stop by and pour money on him. So the message is simple. Go into debt to eat, but literally toss your money at me to please God. Your family and your well-being be damned. And in churches across America, this grift plays out repeatedly. Pastors, under the guise of wanting to bring people to Jesus, repeat the same tropes about being blessed to be a blessing. They weaponize Luke 6:38 to exclusively mean that money given to the church will return to the giver tenfold. This happened in the last church that I attended. The head pastor's wife often delivered that mini sermon before the offering, and she absolutely epitomized the white woman whose proximity to the Christian patriarchal power kept her obedient because she benefited greatly from it. She had perfected the prosperity gospel jingles to incentivize people to tithe beyond their financial comfort. And one of her favorite tricks was to do a call response to Luke 6:38 that went like this. She would say, "Give, and it will be given to you." And all of us were supposed to respond with, "That's for me." And then she would say, "They will pour into your lap a good measure." And we would say, "That's for me." And she would say, "Pressed down, shaken together, and running over." And we would say, "That's for me." And this would go on and on and on until she got through the entire verse. And if you're giving beyond your financial means and dutifully repeating back to the pastor, "That's for me," and it doesn't result in the good measure that you're praying for, then it simply means you didn't give enough, or you didn't pray hard enough, or God was going to reveal something in your life that you need to fix. They are never to blame. They get to keep your money. So keep on praying for God's favor. Keep on giving beyond your ability. Keep on believing, because you can see that the pastor standing there with increased wealth surely means God is shining down on your church. It's the ultimate pyramid scheme, and the only benefactors are the pastor and staff members with the pastor's last name. What many people outside of Christianity fail to understand is that the grift is not foreign to large portions of evangelical culture. In many ways, Christians were conditioned for it from childhood. We were taught that the more painful the sacrifice, the more meaningful the offering. We're supposed to give until it hurts. Give when you cannot afford it. Give and trust God to provide. And if the provision never comes, the fault is never with the system asking you for money. The fault is your lack of faith. And that framework creates people who are extraordinarily vulnerable to manipulation because it trains them to override their own instincts, ignore financial red flags, and spiritualize exploitation. And it happens every Sunday. Now, let's look who Donald Trump appointed to his White House faith office. Mega pastor Paula White. White's history of the prosperity gospel is very well documented. And if you'd like to learn more, I can do a separate video about that because it is very revealing. But for this video, it's important to note that White brags about being Trump's personal ministry for over 20 years. So in other words, the ultimate grifter, who is Donald Trump, was mentored by the ultimate pastor grifter, who as late as February of this year told an audience that if they didn't cough up a sacrificial seed faith totaling $100,000, she would not lay hands on people for healing. That is how a prosperity gospel preacher got the ultimate grifter into the White House. And obviously none of this is a complete list, but when you think of some of the things that Trump has said, from his golden phone to Mexico didn't pay for a wall that Trump said without a doubt they would, even though Trump repeatedly told us that ballroom donations had been secured, and now we find out that he wants taxpayers to cough up $1 billion to pay for it, or that he bragged that a reflecting pool repair was going to cost $1.5 million and it's now approaching $15 million. And what's happening right now with gas prices and inflation soaring, and Biden was brutally attacked for causing that kind of suffering while he was in office. What's the response from the faithful now? They simply double down on their support. This is where the indoctrination extends beyond the prosperity gospel and into holy suffering. So now we got prosperity gospel, Donald Trump, holy suffering. And now you can see how Christian patriarchy deepens this level of conditioning because it trains people to surrender discernment upward toward authority figures. So the husband's in charge, the pastor's in charge, the prophet, the anointed political leader. Followers are often taught that safety comes through obedience rather than independent thought. And that is why so many Christians can hear wildly contradictory statements from people like Trump and remain emotionally committed anyway. The relationship is no longer based on truthfulness. It is based on loyalty, identity, and spiritualized authority. And one of the most disturbing parts of this conditioning is how suffering itself becomes normalized. Many Christians are going viral right now in videos as they proudly state that they are not worried about wars or if the end of the world is near, even if it ends with massive suffering. These are the Christians who were raised to believe that enduring hardship quietly is spiritually noble because the real reward comes later, in heaven, at the return of Jesus, in eternity. That theology erodes compassion because people begin viewing human suffering as either temporary, unavoidable, prophetically necessary, or even divinely ordained. That is why these Christians make these videos casually dismissing wars, economic suffering, climate collapse, or rising costs of living by saying things like, the Bible already said this would happen, or we know how this story ends. All of this is to illustrate the emotional disengagement from real human suffering these Christians have. That emotional disengagement becomes incredibly useful to grifters and authoritarian movements. People who believe the world is supposed to fall apart before Jesus returns are less likely to resist its collapse. People who believe suffering is holy are easy to exploit. People who have been trained to distrust their own discernment are easier to manipulate. People who believe financial accountability is somehow rebellious, they will defend leaders no matter how obvious the contradictions become. This is why deconstructing matters. I'll say it again, deconstructing is not simply leaving church. It is learning how to recognize the manipulative tactics that shaped your understanding of authority, your relationship with money, with compassion, with suffering, with obedience, and what exactly is truth. It's relearning discernment after years of being taught that questioning powerful people made you dangerous or faithless. It is reclaiming the ability to say something about this feels exploitative without immediately feeling guilty for thinking it. And it is also why we must understand how powerful this indoctrination is, not only to ensure that we are not still being influenced by its ways that we may not be aware of, but because of the level of cognitive dissonance this indoctrination causes in those who believe that we should rejoice that humanity is now suffering. I want to be really honest here. Talking to people who are in this indoctrination may be futile until something sadly happens to them that is so tragic that it finally starts to shake them out of that indoctrination when they start to experience real harm or their Jesus doesn't return. I may never be able to prove this part, but I am certain that many of those grifting for power and wealth do not believe in end times theology, and they could care less about Jesus returning. And we know that's true about Trump, of course, but I believe it is also true about those making millions and having massive mega ministries. They're in it for the grift. The point is moot because, like I said, I can't prove it, but it does deserve space here as a reminder to us all that we need to be sure those we trust with our spirituality, our well-being, or our finances should be trustworthy, honorable, and forthright. I do want to close with this. If someone in your life is deeply influenced by high control Christianity and believes that all of this is happening now because it's signaling that Jesus' return is imminent, use caution in approaching them about their faith. Remember, they've also been indoctrinated to believe that we are all wolves in sheep's clothing with reprobate minds. And when I look back at the times when I was heavily influenced by these pastors, the one thing that I recall is when those who didn't agree with me asked questions without judgment, sometimes even saying my answers out loud, it sounded ridiculous. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. I'm going to tag a creator here who's doing amazing work. She has compiled all kinds of data that shows how the Trump administration's policies will impact average Americans, as well as creating a movement for community coalition building. Now, in my writing, I have some questions that you may want to consider if you're going to talk to somebody who's in this type of high control Christianity. Whether you needed to understand why some Christians are rejoicing as we spiral into fascism, or you were seeking suggestions for approaching indoctrinated family or friends, or you simply wanted to understand why you, as a deconstructing Christian, are anxious and confused about what is happening right now, I hope this helped you understand that Christian patriarchy relies on a powerful grift that is sadly effective. It has been perfected with time and diabolical minds that believe that fascism entrenched in Christian nationalism is their best weapon for keeping the power they so crave. Most, if not all, care nothing about the souls of those who suffer under the weight of Christian patriarchy. And this won't come as a surprise. They care even less about those who suffer in the physical world. It is up to us to be informed and do our part to work against this. So I'm going to remind you, keep going. Don't give up hope. I am not. Now, if this video resonates with you, I do have the writing over on Substack. And as always, please follow me on all my platforms to support my work and so that we can stay connected.